Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, my dear viewer. My name is Julian Cruiser, here today with the Foundry, bringing you a very exciting tutorial on advanced paintouts. We're talking paintouts where the camera is moving in 3D space, the subject is moving in 3D space, and we're going to do the whole thing automatically, or as automatically as we can. It's going to be kind of awesome. So if you want to follow along, all the resources you need are in the description below. And we're going to pick up a bunch of cool techniques along the way, such as how to do quick mats with CopyCat and how to do automatic patch matching color correction. So stick around for the whole thing. It's going to be pretty sweet. So let's jump right into it. So what is this mysterious automatic method that we're going to be using? Well, it's based off of the TimeEcho paintout method. And to better illustrate how this works, let's start with a simpler example than a whole 3D space movement. This is a static locked off shot where I am walking from one side to the other. And the principle that we're working off of here is that at no point during this shot am I completely off the frame, but throughout the shot, I am revealing the entire frame. So at this end of the shot, everything over here is revealed. And at this end of the shot, everything over here is revealed. So for an example of this simple, we could probably just take a freeze frame of the end, copy this, merge it on top of this. But how do we do it automatically? And this is important for when you have a more complex shot like this. Well, here's the method. First, we get a roto, and it can be pretty rough, of the subject. This is just a few keyframes here. And then we invert the roto, so we have a shape like this. And then we pre-multiply it to knock out the subject like this. So we have a big hole. And from there, we can use TimeEcho. So TimeEcho, it looks at the current frame and it looks at this number of frames before, and it does some operation to it. You can do a plus, a maximum, or an average. I'm doing an average here. And so it'll take the last 100 frames, average them all together, and that gives us an image like this. You can see here, already pretty exciting, I'm gone, but there's also a bunch of, like, you know, smoke where I was, burn marks on the ground. But really that is just the averaged out hole where I was. And in order to get rid of that, we can use an unpremultiply, because that, since we had a matching alpha channel, that gets averaged out too, and we basically have a map of where those dark spots are. Just unpremultiply, and we're all good. And now you can see, any point during this clip, you know, I'm there and I'm gone. Very simple, very automatic. So the limitation with this method is that it does not work well for shots with moving cameras. Everything in the background needs to be static because it's all being averaged together. So what happens if we do have a moving camera? Well, let's take a look. In this variation of the shot, I'm doing a little digital move here for illustration purposes. And if we try the same method, do the roto, you know, get that going, get me out of there, and then we do the TimeEcho, what do we get? Ooh, the whole thing is very blurry. And the unpremultiply is not going to save us here. So what can we do? Well, before we do the TimeEcho, we need to stabilize the motion of the plate. I've done that here with a tracker. Very simple for a shot like this, because all you need is a single point track. Just do that, grab that from the window up here, and then we do a little stabilize. Now the shot is once again static, and if we try that same TimeEcho method again, it works. And of course, after we're done with that, we need to reapply the motion, that'll come back later, with a match move in this case. You can see as soon as we do that, there we go. We can go AB, plate, and paint out plate, and we've got what we need. But I know you're thinking, this looks like it works great for sort of 2D movements, but how in the world are we going to stabilize a 3D movement? Well, the traditional method is to use a camera tracker like this. I have this shot here with a box on the ground. I'm orbiting around it. Like this. We take a camera tracker, track the shot, so we get a bunch of points, take it into Nuke's 3D space here and reconstruct the geometry either by hand or with a Poisson mesh node. Here I've done it by hand because it's a little bit more precise. And there we go. We've got a box and we've got the ground. Very simple. And we can use a project 3D shader to project from the tracked camera the original plate, sort of just like a regular projector would. And then if we view it through that original camera, like this, you can see that it looks exactly the same, which is to be expected. But if we view it through a static camera, that is, you know, take this camera, duplicate it, then delete the translate and rotate animation, we get the following. Look at that, stabilized movement. And in this particular example, the subject is not moving, so we couldn't really do a paint out like we were doing over here, but this is to illustrate how we would stabilize the motion. Because look, now the ground isn't moving, the box isn't moving, we can work with this. But there's a big issue with this method, and that is that it's really tedious. This scene has two pieces of geometry. It has a card and it has a box, and it took me like an hour to get it lined up properly. And that just might be a skill issue, but think about having to do this for a more complex scene. It starts to get pretty mind-numbing. And you can see here in the background, there's this pot and this shed that aren't represented with the reconstructed geometry, and they are still moving all over the place because they're not being represented properly. So if you want a proper 3D stabilization, all the geometry in the scene has to be represented. And it's going to be really tedious if you try and do it by hand. So what can we do to do this automatically? Well, let's discover it together. Okay, so I've got the template script loaded up here, and it might be under a different name by the time you get it, but it should be the same thing as this. We've got our action VFX clip, we've got a denoise node, and we've got a write node for caching it out. So let's take a look at the clip and see what we've got to work with. All right, we've got moving subject, moving camera. It's going to be a difficult one. We got the method though. And importantly, for this method to work, we have everything in the shot revealed at some point. You can see here at the beginning, behind the subject, everything is concealed. But by the end, there it is. That wood pile and the stuff on the floor, concealed, revealed. And here at the end, this trailer is concealed, but here it's revealed. So that means our method can work. So first things first here, I'm just going to save this project under a different name. We'll call this maybe our comp version 1. And then I'm just going to write out our EXR cache, because Nuke reads EXRs a lot faster than it reads other file types. And it's just a little nicer to work with. And of course, it's always good to work with denoised footage. I've got my ridiculously long file name here, and we're all set to go. I'm just going to go ahead and cache that out quick. Frames 1 to 65. Cool. Now I'll just grab a read, put that same thing in here, and we're good to go. So if we look back to the demos that we did a second ago, what do we need in order to accomplish an automatic paint out? Well, we need a matte of our subject, and we need a way to stabilize the footage. So let's start with the easy one and do the matte. I want to do this automatically because I can't stand doing manual roto. And for that, we're going to be using CopyCat. Now, a while ago, I made a video on my channel about how to get quality roto out of MODNet. And since that video came out, I've made some discoveries, which I would like to share with you now. It makes it easier and faster to get good quality mattes automatically. So we're going to use MODNet, which you can get from the Cattery website. And I've got the version that's broken where you need to change the color config and then put it back. But if you download it now, I think that's fixed. And you can see we're getting a matte out of MODNet already. And it looks pretty good except for the giant hole in her back. So there's a few things we can always do to improve a MODNet matte. The number one thing being clamping, which isn't going to do that much here because there's not really much over 1 or below 0 here. But we can also apply a grade and just mess with the settings a little bit. I'm turning on white clamp here, or I could just put this behind the clamp. And I'm going to adjust the gamma. And as I bring this up, it really makes a big difference. So the principle that we're going to be using is that we're going to use MODNet not as the final source of our matte frames, but as an intermediate source for the training frames for a new network. Because the main issue with MODNet is that it is not temporally consistent, and it just has big mistakes sometimes. Like this frame, we bring down the gamma, there's big holes in just in the body of our subject here. So what we're going to do is first, we have this glowing halo here. I want to get our matte as nice as possible before we do anything with it. So I'm just going to grade it, bring down the white point to fill in as much of the holes as possible. And then also bring up the black point so that we get rid of some of that halo. Now I'm going to just grab a copy node. That was K for copy spelling. And we're just going to hook this up, pipe our red channel into our alpha channel. That way, when we look at this copy node, we can hit M on the keyboard to get our matte overlaid over the footage. So we'll just scrub through our clip and pick out any frames that already have really decent looking mattes from MODNet, because MODNet produces good mattes, but only sometimes. So we'll pick out all the frames that have good ones. Like here, this frame is a good one. There are still some issues. For example, this bit of the coat should be included, and our leg here is not in the matte at all. So I'm going to get a frame hold, put that down, and then I'm just going to put a little roto in here and add those bits in. I don't mind doing this much roto. It's just, when it gets to be much more than this, it can be a real bother. There it is. And just to make sure that is part of the coat. Yep. Okay. So all I'm going to do now is just proceed through the whole sequence like this and try and get a number of frames that cover the different types of input images that we would be looking at for this sequence. So I'll just do a few. So now that I've got these individual frames, let's feed it into a new CopyCat node, like that. And what we've got to do is make sure that our input data is in the format that CopyCat understands and expects. And that is a sequence, or actually two sequences of input data, the ground truth data being our desired output and the input data being our input. Two sequences, and it must be the channels that it expects as well, since we're going to be using initial weights. Initial weights are sort of a pre-trained model that we can start with and mold to fit our own use case and our own input data. We want to start with the human matting, large initial weights, and that model expects RGB data as the input, just RGB, and RGBA.red, just the red channel, as the ground truth. So I'm going to set my data directory to a CopyCat folder in my project folder, and then I'm just going to put this down here and we'll get our sequences ready. So first we need to do a time clip node, and we'll just clip each of these frame held clips to one frame. One frame, one frame, one frame, one frame. And then we can use an append clip and hook it up. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we've got 4 frames in a row, 1, 2, 3, 4, with our training data in it. Now it expects, like I said, RGB for the input, so we can do a remove node. We'll set it to keep and keep the RGB channels. And then on this side, we want to use a shuffle node. Shuffle that alpha into the red channel. And then we'll use another remove node and say, just keep the red channel, like this. So now we've got, there's our input sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4. And there is our ground truth sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. And we'll hook that up like this. And also, before we move any further, I find that it can improve quality and train a lot faster if you run the training at a lower resolution. So I'm going to hit period on my keyboard here, dot, to make a little dot, and then we can, before we do any of the splitting, I'll put a reformat node, hook that up, and scale it down to like 1/3. For this resolution, I find that that is a decent size to downscale to. And then also I want to make sure that once again we are clamped. And I need to do that again because this is pulling straight from the original plate, not the clamped plate. Because unclamped footage will seriously mess up CopyCat training. And now we just watch the magic happen. We don't have to train this for very long at all. I usually just like to hit start training, and once it looks like it's done, just hit cancel. So let's take a look. You can see just after 100 steps, it's already almost converged to the ground truth data, but we'll let it go a little further. We can also watch in the progress tab a graph of where our training is to see how it's doing. We're this green line here, and you can see that it's kind of starting to plateau a little bit, and once we get to that stage, it's probably good to call it quits. So 500 steps or so, we will hit cancel. And now we can go to that main tab of CopyCat here, and we'll hit create inference, and we can check how it did. So I'll grab the same reformat and the clamp here because we need to modify whatever input data we're giving it to be the same as the training data. And we'll just hook this up to our footage. Now remember, it's only seen 4 frames of this input footage, but as soon as we hook it up here to our full sequence, let's take a look at the result. Not bad. You can see there are some issues with flickering at the beginning, and that's because there's a little bit of insufficient training data at this point. Frame 9 is our first frame in the sequence here. So in order to improve the quality, you can see where there's bad stuff happening, we just need more input data. So I'll go back here, and I'll go to the first frame because we have nothing there. And this is going to require a little bit more cleanup, but that's no problem. We'll do another frame hold here, set to current frame, and then we'll go in here, turn off the matte so I can see, and I'll just roto in where it needs work, feather it out, and do a little of the same thing over here. Cool. Now, that's all it took to just add that in there. And let's run that training again for same, just 500 steps. You also could have hit resume training to start from the previous checkpoint, but it's so short, I didn't do it. Cool. That only took a couple minutes, and now I will hit create inference again. We got our new one here. Plug it in, and let's see if there's a difference. Yep, much more stable at the beginning. You check out just our first 10 frames here. This was the last result, and this is our new result. You can see how much difference just that one extra frame of training data made. So it's not perfect. There's still some flickering in the hair. There's still some garbage in the background, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be sort of a rough matte. And this is a lot faster than it would have taken me to do the roto by hand. Just to clean up our output, what we do have here, I'm going to use a grade node, turn on white clamp, and then we'll boost up our gamma so we can see all the garbage in the background, and just increase the black point until that all goes away. And then we'll decrease the gamma so we can see how there's a ton of holes, and just bring down the white point a little bit until that is no longer a problem. And now we've got nicer matte. You can see there still is a lot of flickering, and we can take care of that using another hack that I found out about. This is not an intentional, I assume, way that you're supposed to use the denoise node, but it's very useful for cleaning up temporally unstable mattes like this one. All we're going to do is grab the denoise node like this. We will set this as the source. Then we're going to grab a vector generator like this, hook this up to our plate denoised, and I'm going to set this as the motion input. Now, what we're going to abuse here is the temporal processing feature. This will blend surrounding frames into the current one, but it warps them to match the motion that occurs between the frames first. So you'll see how it works. But in order for it to work on a mat like this, we need to do some stuff to it first. We will need to first shuffle it into the red, green, and blue channels like that. Yeah, there we go. And then we also need to give it a little offset in a grade node. And we don't need to worry about clamping this. We're just going to bring it right back down afterwards. So I will adjust the sampling area on the denoise so it doesn't yell at me. And then I'll just turn on temporal processing. And we want to blend, maybe we'll try 4 frames. And here's the trick. Frame blending. Maximum value on here is 10. We're going to go with, yeah, 1,000,000. And this, if we look at the output here, oh, right. We're also going to have to reformat our motion vectors to be the same size as our mat. And now that we've done this, we can take a look at the result. We can see some weird artifacts around the sides, but generally it's much smoother. And those artifacts that are happening there, well, we can change the number of frames to blend. That might help. Or just grade them out like before. We need to do an offset of -0.1, and then we'll turn up that black point. Now we've got a much more temporally coherent mat. Hey, so future Julian coming in here quick. I realized that these ghosting artifacts that come in on the sides are actually pretty much avoidable if we just use the actual alpha mat as the input for our vector generator instead of the original source footage. It really cleans it up. Also, I forgot to enable white clamp on this grade node. Yikes, what was I thinking? Make sure to do that. Okay, so we will now reformat this back to the main size, to format like that, and we will shuffle it into the alpha channel like that. Just alpha is the output, and we're going to go ahead and cache this out. Remember, this mat doesn't have to be perfect. It's just sort of a garbage mat, but the more precise it is, the better. Okay, I'm just setting my channels to alpha only because that's all we need. And I'll go ahead and render that out quick. And there we have it. There's our roto, and we can combine it with the original plate with a copy node like so, A and B, to see what the result is that we've gotten. There we go. Now that's pretty good. We've got this great mat, and it only took us a very short amount of time. In real time, this took 15 minutes. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, I suggest you go ahead and grab yourself a glass of chocolate milk, because you deserve it. And in this time, it is important to remember our script organization principles. Always keep an organized script. Put all this stuff inside of a box. This is our roto.